Intro. So today we have an odd video because this is the last episode in this series. So to start off with, I've laid out all the rules and I'm going to be throwing them out the window. What I'm going to do here is two things. One, I'll go through all the trends I've noticed over all these side quests. If it's more than one, it's a trend worth addressing. Two, find multiple ways to make it better. I'll be giving you skills and tricks and fixes to a lot of these problems I find. The point of this is that it's up to you to how you fix them. I'm just here to guide you. Obviously, if you haven't noticed already, I've made a series on pretty much all the side quests at this point. So if you want to know my more in-depth opinion about a said side quest that I mentioned in this video, please go check it out, just to understand the context between each one. I won't be explaining why like a certain side quest is bad because, like I've said, I've already done that. Also, this might seem odd in terms of me jumping around from one topic to the next, so apology for that. I think that's all that needs to be said. So, without hesitation, let's jump into it. The trends. Let's start from the basics. Basics of a side quest. Part 1. What is a side quest? I know this might be tedious, but I need to set up a foundation. Well, for the most part, it's a quest that is not the main quest of the main game. So any task outside the main mission is technically a side mission. So we know what these side quests are, but why do we need them? Well, that can be because of content. Some games feel like the main mission isn't enough to satisfy the player, so they put side content to keep them entertained and playing. Another reason is that they feel like the player might be bored of the main mission, so the side content keeps them interested enough that way they can go back to the main quest. Certain games have ways of doing this the very same task without doing a side quest. A good example of this is DMC. While DMC doesn't have any side quest, its combat system can be mastered and played over and over again. A different example of this, of a quest done well in a game, is Control, which the side content gives you special abilities you can't get anywhere else. With all that in mind, is the mere idea of a side quest good? Depends on the game, but mostly yes, giving the player more to do is always good. But, on the other hand, if a quest are nothing but fetch quest, then we have a whole new problem. When new problems occur. As of late, people really hate side quests, but it wasn't always like this. In fact, I'd say generally people like them, until open worlds became more of a thing. This was single-handedly done by one company. I have a feeling you know where I'm going with this. Ubisoft is the company I'm accusing of this, with most of their games like Watch Dogs, Far Cry to some extent, and especially Assassin's Creed have the same problems, the open world. Well, not the open world itself, but rather what they put in it. You see, the side quests they gave the player in games were chores. I mean it. It was covered with stupid bullshit for the player to do. The fetch quests, the annoying gameplay loops that have you do the same thing over and over and over again. Ubisoft is probably one of the best examples on how not to do a side quest. What can we learn from these examples? Easy. We need to understand what makes a bad and a good side mission. The bad, the good, and the side mission. What makes a good side quest has good gameplay loops, variety, adds something that you don't get in the main quest, and finally, a good story. What makes a bad side quest is the opposite actually. Bad gameplay loops, no variety, adds nothing that you couldn't get outside the main quest, and has a bad story. Now notice how I used broad language for some of these terms. Example, good and bad gameplay loops and good and bad stories. This is basically because on each by case basis it can be different. Up first, what is a gameplay loop? Gameplay loop is having the player do something or a task they repeat. This sounds bad at first, but every game has this to some extent. That's okay. Side quests usually depend on it so heavily that they're nearly impossible to separate. Again, this can be said for most games as a whole, but more so for side journeys. Now with that covered, we have one more thing to talk about till we get to the main trends of the side quest in Arkham Knight. Does the open world affect a side quest? The short answer is no, but let's face it, a lot of side quests occur due to there being an open world. It's just easier for a quest to be made outside of an already existing world than building a whole new level around it. I'm not saying you can't make a side quest from a linear game. Hell, I'm showing you some footage right now. It's just harder. With all that being said, we can get to the fun part. Yes! Let's go! Short side quest being bad. Part 2. Okay, now I'm just going to talk about all the trends I see of these quests. Like this short quest. Question, why do they all suck? The ones I'm talking about are the Hush mission, which had a 2 out of 10, and Deacon Blackfire mission, that was a 1 out of 10, the lowest score in the entire series. Fuck me, like how do you mess up this badly? I think most of us can agree that it being short isn't in and of itself a bad thing. But because of it being short, it leads to a bunch of pitfalls. One of which being a story. How do you tell a story all in less than like 7 minutes or less? Answer, you can't without a bunch of holes. And yes, I know short films are a thing, but I don't think I need to explain why games and short films are completely different medium with completely different rules and methods. You see, the story isn't the only problem with making a side mission go by at super speed. It's the gameplay. Oh, the gameplay. It's bad. Like man, like really bad. The gameplay is one group fight for Deacon, which isn't even that good, and Hush, which is walking forward and pressing one button. Peak gameplay, I know. See, the problem in and of itself isn't the length, but the bad correlation and lack of talent/effort in these quests. I'll repeat this just to make the message clear. The length isn't the problem, but the problem's not dealt with it being a short quest. A good example of this is Two-Faced Bandit. While only having 3 sections, it's one of the best in the whole game, the long quest being good. This goes hand in hand with the last point. The long ones are usually pretty good. Examples, Riddler's Revenge and Line of Duty. I think it's because of the time that you have to fully flesh out their stories. That's why some of the best stories are the longer ones. But you see, there's another that I didn't mention. The Militia side quest. These are usually okay, and that throws the length of quality theory out the window. Again, length isn't what makes quality. It's just a trend that I've noticed. To be fair, I think it's just a coincidence. But it's something worth bringing up. Boss fights. I may talk a little bit about the main quest and about the whole game in general because it's worth pointing out. Boss fights. Oh boy. You see, one defense I've heard in favor of the boss fights in Arkham Knight is that, I'll try my best to steel man his argument here, it goes something like this. Most of the boss fights in the Arkham series aren't that good, so getting rid of them is the right choice for Arkham Knight. I would agree with that, but one problem, buddy. The bosses are still in the game. You fight Professor Pig, the Deathstroke tank fight. Two-Face is technically a boss fight. The big black boxer guy, that name escapes me. There are multiple Arkham Knight fights. This is the problem with making this point. If you want to take away the focus from the boss fights and onto the enemy types and abilities, that's fine. But there's still boss fights in the game that are more or less half-assed and worse. I do believe that the boss fights in the Arkham series are the weakest part. We don't need to look no further than Arkham Origins, which to explain my reasoning would take another video. Point being, just cause you don't like the boss fights doesn't mean you stop putting the effort into them. And where it falls apart even more, a good example of this is the Deathstroke fight, which is just a copy of the Arkham Knight tank fight. Who thought that was acceptable? I think most people agree that City and Asylum had some of the better boss fights. Another good example of this is the original tank fight with Arkham Knight. All you have to do to beat him, near the end at least, is spamming everything with a little thought. It's not even a true tank fight. And then you have the not really kind of boss fights that are bosses that really shouldn't be a boss in the first place. Example, the Arkham Knight stealth fight and the Professor Pig fight. For the Knight fight, you just need to do the hard task of going under him. Very hard. Same can be said for the pig fight, which has you press the counter button. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but what else surrounds it? Take out the other enemies or just slip by them. Okay? Really? Why not put any effort into it? It just saddens me to see. I mean, it's not bad because there's nothing there to critique. Then you have some of the bosses that are just okay, like the croc fight and the big black guy that shows some talent. Wait, I just realized they're the same fight. So in total, this element in the game is in poor condition and critically needs help. The track record of quality. So I added up all my scores and the verdict is all over the place. There's like a lot of 4 out of 10s, which I'll get to, and no 3 out of 10s or 10 out of 10s, so this leads me to think a lot of different things as to why this is. One theory is that they had different people working on different projects, like some type of B team for the side quest. At least they had to have some small team for the Riddler stuff. Another theory is that they all had one team, and they went through it with not the same or more passion. There's no real clear answer. But why would the quality be so different from each other? I think it comes down to time, or to be exact, how much they planned ahead of time. You can tell the Line of Duty and Gunrunner were planned, but some of the others weren't. I think personally they saw that they had extra time and threw in Two-Face, Firefly, and Deacon for more content, rather than putting too much thought into it, which is okay, but not everything has to be planned from the start, but it certainly helps your chances for a better game. DLC length. Some people have one common criticism with the DLC, and that is that it's too short. Is this true? I mean, yes and no. Yes, because it's short, or not as long as the other missions, but the length doesn't change the quality of it. As we've already discussed, length can make it more likely to be good or bad, but that's not a guarantee. And here the same could be said. Unlike the other than the usual MWs in the base game, here it's a bit more consistent. Hatter was a 6 out of 10, Freeze was a 9 out of 10, League was 4 out of 10, Croc was 4 out of 10. If I add this up, it's more than average, which I think most people can agree with. But it being better doesn't mean it making it longer. In fact, for most of them, it would appear to damage them like Hatter and Croc, which dragged already. But for the League mission, it would help. Overall, I don't think so. So, how is the DLC overall? DC overall. It's okay. I'd hope for it to be better though. Nearly a year of the base release, and this is what we got? I know they're working on other stuff, but this is it? I'm a bit disappointed. Mostly because a lot of these are small in scale. Think about it, all except for one, the Mr. Freeze story, is about capturing the bad guy. Okay, maybe not Raish, but my point still stands. So in that case it would probably be half? Yeah, whatever. You'd think for the last bit of content for the game, they would spice it up a little. Have more of a consequence, more choices, more something, you know? So now we get to the question. Was this a good DLC? It depends. If you want a quick handful of side missions to enjoy, a little bit of fun, then yeah, it's good. If you want side missions that would last long as the militia side quest and the Line of Duty, then you're going to be disappointed. Overall though, it's okay. Story. Or rather, the lack of it. There's something I've noticed about a lot of these quests. Something that happens way too often that leads to a lot of pitfalls most of these side quests fall into. You know how I talked about the gameplay loops and whatnot? This is where it comes out to play. I think a lot of games do this, so it's not uncommon. This game is focused on the gameplay loop that they forget about the story. Most of these side quests comes down to capturing the bad guy, and that's it. I know I said that for the DLC, but here it really applies. And don't get me wrong, if your gameplay loop is good enough, then it's okay, but for the most of the time, it isn't. A great example of this is Firefly. There is literally only one thing going for this story, and that's capture the bad guy. Another example of this is Two-Face, again where the story is just taking him out. This leaves a lot of side missions left hollow, or worse yet, a lack of any motivation to do them outside of the game loop. What does this tell us as the game as a whole? With little story, you make the player feel like a waste of time, outside of just completing it. I have my problems with the DLC, but at least it had more meat to its story. I'll repeat myself, if you sorely want to focus on the gameplay loop, then you better damn well be sure it's good, or else you ruin the risk of the player not caring in the first place. Threads from the last game. Like many games, there are going to be open threads that need tying up. In this case, it was Hush and Azrael. And whoo, Nelly, did they fuck up. As you may have noticed, I'm trying to show you that there are many problems with the side quest overall. They start small, but they add up over time. But here, they messed up hard. To such a point where if you ask people, the people that played this game or a fan of this series, what they thought about the side quest, this will be mentioned by them at some point. Is that for a good reason? Yes. Okay, so let me explain why this case is so much more worse than the others. First, they had one big thing that made the quest stand out. Hush, because he looked like Bruce Wayne, which was huge. Imagine what you can do with that. For Azrael, it was that he knew, somehow, that Batman was going to end, and that he was going to replace him, leading into Arkham Knight perfectly. I remember during the release of Arkham Knight that people were theorizing that these two were going to be in the main mission somehow or connected to the Arkham Knight. See, that was the intent, to drum up interest. Then in the following game they either forgot or ended it so quickly that you ask yourself, what was even the point? That's the worst part about this. It starts off great, then drifts off into nothingness and in a pit of fire. Example, Azrael being connected to Batman's end just never happens. Example, Hush uses Bruce's face in one scene, then never uses it again. Speaking of which, these side quests just end. It's not even brought up to a proper conclusion, it just kind of ends. If you choose to leave, you just never see him again. And you don't even get a follow-up for DLC. And it's even worse for Hush. We take him down to never getting a proper send-off. I don't understand why you would give him a role in the first place only to abandon it later. It makes no sense. You don't have to put them in a main role. Just put more time and care into properly finishing their story. It's just such a waste. Loops. No, I'm not referring to game loops. I'm talking about the loops that the game makes you do for certain missions. The main examples being Firefly and Armored and Dangerous. I want to talk about a greater problem that I've seen with these two missions. The loops you make. Instead of the game throwing something original, it makes you do these awkward loops around the open world. And my problem isn't that the loops aren't original. My problem is that they're not good. The tight corners at times are impossible to dodge. The enemies and the enemies' attacks can straight up be unfair because you can't move out of the way. The loop can just be so draining just after seeing the same part of the open world again and again and again. And with the Batmobile having very few weapons and moves, it doesn't make it much better. The loop sections will go the same way every time. Try to dodge objects like fire and missiles. Boost once in a while, run into walls every now and again, and hit one button or the missile attack thing over and over until you won. Before you ask, no, this isn't oversimplifying it. That's all you do. Do all these things and the loops are incredibly annoying to do. I doubt you'll find someone who enjoys the loops in this game. If you were wondering why I gave such high compliments to the Riddler racetracks, this is why. Not only because it's better than this, but because it's actually good. Moving on. Villain. Lack of depth. What do I mean by this? Simple. I don't think the way that some of these villains are portrayed in the best light in terms of character. Example. Two-Face side mission doesn't tell us anything about his character, other than that we already know about him. He flips his coin for his morality, and that's it. I know we get brief talks of his backstory, but that's all it is. Nothing adding to the villain, just what we already know. Because of this, this makes most of the side quests hard to stand out. I don't need there to be an in-depth character study of each quest, just give us more than we already know. Example, Penguin. For the start of the mission, we're told that the Penguin wants to own the city, but we're never shown this through his actions. It reminds me of the same problem with Arkham City. The problem with Arkham City is that none of the villains were able to breathe. The game was so focused on rushing from one plot point to the next that you forgot to have any actual development of characters and motivations. And while here they have plenty of time, for the most part, and we still have the same issue. A positive example is the Riddler quest. It gives us more of the Riddler, with tons of dialogue and plot points to give us lots of time to stand out, or for him to stand out at least, versus most other side missions. Story choices. At some points in certain missions, the game will give you a story choice, 2 missions to be exact. The Azrael choice, which has you choose Azrael's fate, and the Shadow War choice, which has you choose whether or not to kill Raish. How are they? Not good. Like, they don't come close to making a super impactful choice. The point of having a story choice, typically at least, is to show the player and how choices impact the story, to satisfy the player in some way. Wait, how did Batman Telltale footage get in here? I said impactful choices. Much better. Something you may not do is if the character choice in the story is not satisfying. But here, it's not satisfying either way. On one hand, Azrael becomes a bad guy, making it pretty much all the time that we've spent with him, training and whatnot, a waste of time. And on the other hand, him being a good guy just ends. We don't even see how this has affected him in any way. Just, like, stops. For the race choice, as we've gone over before, isn't much better. One is more valuable than the other. I don't see the point in doing this in the first place. After the side missions are done, which is right after the choice, it just ends. Again, a choice doesn't just solve a certain ending that might be controversial. If anything, it makes it harder. Now you have to make sure that both endings are just as good as the other, making life and storytelling difficult. If you want this challenge, that's okay. But putting little effort into this work with no understanding is terrible. This is a strange thing about this game, is that it'll make weird decisions like having a story choice, but here not doing it well, which leaves me with a question. Why did you do this in the first place? To spice things up? To make it harder for yourself? To something? I don't know. But let this be a lesson for others that story choices are not the easy way out. If anything, it could be the problem. A lot of 4 out of 10s. Something I want to point out is that a lot of my scores are 4 out of 10s. I think there's a few reasons for this. Few being 2. One is the underachieving element, like committing only halfway to certain ideas. The loops and trends from the last game being a big example of this. And the second reason is that it's just bad enough to be below average and better than the worst, outside the normal. There is a positive trend here, and that's something new. Either plot-wise or gameplay-wise, when you get something outside the norm, it's usually for the better. I mean, who doesn't want something new for a change? It gives the player a reason to keep on playing, to want to explore, to care more about the story. We, as humans, are drawn to new things. It's just a basic instinct. It's not just instinct, it's good for the game as the whole. The game needs to be more than just a few things. For a game to survive in today's landscape, it needs to have the ability to shake things up now and again. Example, Two-Faced Bandit and the Riddler Revenge, being the two big ones that come to mind. While there are many issues with the side quests in this game, for sure, this is a bright spot in a very dim sky. The idea versus execution. I talked about this in my Shadow War video, but here I'll expand upon it. This game has a big problem with ideas and its eventual execution. This may sound weird, but I'll use it as an example. The open world in the concept art and the open world in the game are very different. Gotham in the concept art was far more dense and had a greater size of buildings, each having gargoyles and dark atmosphere, one island being completely in construction over poorer areas. It tells a lot about Gotham that we haven't seen before. Well, maybe Tim Burton's Batman, and that was pretty amazing in terms of Gotham. Now, the execution. The buildings are spaced further apart, there are fewer gargoyles and lighter atmosphere, and that one island is only halfway close to the concept, but doesn't quite commit. Instead of an old Gotham, we get a very high-tech Gotham. See, the problem isn't the idea, because the idea sets the foundation, but what it becomes. And before you say it, no, the open world in Arkham Knight isn't bad, but the foundation could have helped it be better. That's the pickle that Arkham Knight finds itself in near constantly. Except most of the time the execution isn't as good as the idea, but in some ways can be straight up bad. And I'll say it again. I like the idea of Azrael, I like the idea of Hush, I like the idea of the militia, but when it comes down to execution, it falls short. I want these things to do well, but it has let me down time and again, which gives me a question. Why have this big and great idea in the first place if it's going to be executed this poorly? To binge or not to binge? That is the question. This is the plight I find myself in sometimes, whether to binge the entire quest or not. I mean, either it's just because I want it out of the way, or just because I enjoyed playing it. The game kind of lets you make this choice, which I'm 50-50 on. On one side, the choice of the player is always a good thing, and on the other side, letting the player do this all in one go can harm the intent of the side quest and what it was originally made for, which is binging through all of them. It's not a huge problem, it just depends what you're going for, and in this case, it was more to the player's choice. Alright, finally, checklist. Here, I must rant. Tell me, what happens when all these problems add up? What happens when previous story trends fail to achieve their goal? What happens when you're stuck in a loop? What happens if the story is barely there? What happens if the execution isn't nearly or even close to the original idea? What happens when the villains don't have any depth? What happens when the story choices don't work? The answer to this question is hard, but it can be solved with another question. What is the point of doing these side quests? To answer this question, we must go to the average player who played this game in the first place, or at least through some of the side quests. So I asked Combo Killer, and his response was something like this.
I don't know, Arkham Knight overall didn't click with me, and maybe that's why maybe that's why people, generally don't talk about a lot of the side content, even if it is required to unlock the true ending, because at least when I played it, it just felt like why?
And this ties right back to the topic at hand. Why do these side quests, and why even care at all? The answer is you don't. Players don't have a reason to play them, other than the upgrades, which people don't care about anyways. To make this point, I'll use an example of another game that did this right. Time to talk about Night Call, one of the best games of the year and nearly the decade. It's a perfect example because it's a game nearly entirely made up of side quests. For those that haven't played it, here's a quick summary. You play a taxi driver that was attacked by enter said killer. You barely survive. A detective wants you to help and find the killer within a week. You gather evidence and clues to find the killer until you confront the killer and capture him or her. Other than that, it's nearly entirely made up of side quests. So what are the reasons for doing these side quests? Easy, because you need the money. If you played it, you know money runs out, and fast. Why playing Taxi Driver is very important, because that's your only source of revenue, and the impact of each conversation can change their life, giving you, the player, an incredible amount of power story-wise. What do you have in Arkham Knight to encourage you to do the side missions, other than capture the bad guy? It becomes a checklist, and there goes all the hard work on the missions just out the window because they forgot to ask the basic question of why. The end of Batman. One thing that came to mind while working on this project is that this is Batman's last story for a lot of these characters. This is the last Riddler side story in the Arkham series. This is the last Penguin story of the Arkham series. This is the last Two-Face story, and so on. So I'll leave you with a thought. Does it satisfy me? To me, no. I even like the Riddler quest, but it doesn't give me a satisfactory conclusion. I think that makes me feel that the story wasn't properly ended. Like, think of all the interesting things you can do with Penguin and Two-Face story-wise, and they barely touch upon it. Some of these gameplay-wise are alright. Story-wise, they're just wasting their potential. You think that their own side quest would have a lot more fleshed out time for them, but Riddler and Mr. Freeze were the closest that we got to this. No correlation. Funny enough, after all I've said, there's not much of a correlation between most of these side quests. Like I've talked about, the range of quality before and how it's done is all over the place, although there are more 4 out of 10s than anything else. You can tell that they were winging it in terms of each quest. Example, Man-Bat and Hush both focus on story, but one is way more thought out than the other. Example, Two-Face, Bandit, and Penguin are both out of the ordinary, yet one is clearly better than the other. They didn't have a plan to do any of this shit, they just did it. Which is unbelievably dumb and shows that there are lack of knowledge. I can't possibly explain as to why you need to plan to do multiple quests, other than just showing you what happens when you don't. You end up with a similar yet different problems. If you want to make video games in the future that has side quest, please, I beg of you, think before putting it in the game. That's all I want. Okay, with that out of the way, this is where the fun begins. How to make it better. Some have the issue of it being too short or too long. A few solutions. 1. Go socialism style by having all the missions be equal length, either equally long or equally short, and or cut down or increase the amount of side missions. That helps you focus on what you're trying to achieve. If you want more side missions, but short in length. If you wanted more side missions but short in length, then that's one way of going about it. Another way is having few side missions but each in super in depth. All up to you. So there are 2 extremes you can go. Either go and make the boss fights more boss-like, with less emphasis on realism by having depth and complexity, or get rid of them completely, and or more or less fights. The way you do it is up to you. A few options. Narrow down the missions you work on each with equal amount of detail. Another way is a rule set that I've set up for this series. Another is comparing other missions to other missions to see which works and what doesn't, what to use and what not to use in other side quests. One way you can fix this is by randomizing the patterns and paths. This way you're not seeing the same thing over and over again, and or is adding more enemies or abilities to the Batmobile. Another way you can take it is by just not having it. You really don't necessarily need it, so leaving it out is fine. So this depends on what you want to do with the past story points. One of the most obvious ones is including these story points in the main story, if you so desire. Another way is to pay them off in a more satisfying way. In general, give them time to properly wrap up their stories. It is mandatory though. There are only a couple of ways to fix this. 1. Give more time to said villains, or 2. Understand what has or hasn't been done with each villain. Due to this being such a broad issue, the answers are broad as well. I think there's a few ways to handle this. One is the most simple. Just don't have them in the game. Or have it in a more important role by 1. More than them, and or 2. Have the decisions be more impactful, as long as you know what you have to do to be better and not make the same mistakes. I don't think this could be solved. More of a warning sign if anything else. If you have an idea, know how much it can be executed to. Just know what limits of the idea before trying to execute it. This is more of a personal choice for you. Do you want the player to binge or not to binge? Simple question. Up to you. The end of Batman is a bit more controversial part of the game. Well, not the most, but close. Due to the handling of it not being as good as most wanted it to be. So if you were to be put back in that position, the position being making the end of Batman's story, what would you do differently? This is easy. Give the player a reason to do side quest. Other than upgrades and the small satisfaction of capturing each villain, what this is up to you. Remember, something that the player either needs or wants to do or has to. What to add? What would you add to make the game better? What would you take away? What would you take away? Something important or something small? So what would I do? Individually, I would change a lot, but these are general changes I want to make. This one's up first because I believe it's more important. Timers. Simple answer. a timer for the player. If they run out of time, hostages will die. This makes the player go after or finish certain quests. But this also leads to the idea of a bar. A bar, when full, will kill you, making you start from one of your earliest checkpoints. This will punish the player for failing and wasting their time. The point is to make the player be put in the shoes of an actual hero, by letting a few die because you can't save everyone being the main lesson behind this design. Not many hero games really touch upon it. Third, focus on more of the villains. Give them more time, more spotlight, more of their character. Batman has one of the best rogues gallery in comic history. It's a shame for it to be so underused. Now, if you want to make a game inspired by the Arkham series, learn from Arkham Knight. The mistakes and the accomplishments and everything in between. So what is the score? It must all be for something, right? Well, this is hard to describe, but no, there is no score. Let me explain. By throwing a score on a side mission is easy. There's little to judge, making the options less difficult. But judging the side quest as a whole is hard to do. The numbers are all over the place, with high highs and low lows. It's too scattered to make a score. A good example of this is Batman Telltale. A perfect time to talk about it because when this video comes out, my analysis/review should be right around the corner. See, the game at its core is like a 5 out of 10. It's fairly mediocre. But when you look at the characteristics and choices, and it breaks into like a 2 out of 10. And making it overall a 3.5/10. Doesn't convey the mediocrity and or brokenness of it. I just think games are complicated as a genre than most would give it credit for. That's why I laugh at corporate companies trying to throw a number at the end to such a point where their score is untrustable. And or you run into the same problem YMS runs into, or it gives a lot of the movies that he watches a 6 out of 10, to a point where he has it as merch. This leads me to another problem. One 5 out of 10 can be totally different from a 5 out of 10. As in, one 5 out of 10 can have multiple qualities that are bad and good, but add up as average, and a 5 out of 10 that across the board is average on everything. My point is that a score doesn't show the full game. It's too simplified, and that's why I can't put a score for this. There's too many variables to account for. If your question is, well, why didn't you have this score system in the first place if you weren't going to pay it off? And to that I say, GG, well played, 4 out of 10, fucking kill me. Fitting way to end this. Ooh, that was another good one. Man, I should have a compilation of just all of those little air bubbles. More. I'm getting frustrated again. There are only a couple ways to fix the. What did I write? Why did I have a seizure? Okay. And a ginger man goes crazy. Colorized. I wanna end myself in Fortnite. Overall though, it's okay. Not my fucking day. Not my fucking day. Not my fucking day. Not my fucking day. But the problem's not dealt with, it being a short quest. What? Super speed. Can't even fucking English. That didn't muffle my noise a lot. Oh, it didn't. I have like 16 pages, which isn't a lot in terms of like an actual YouTube video. My longest was like 30, and my Arkham Origins script is fucking huge. But for a Tales of the Arkham series video, this is a lot. Like at most, I would get it to like 7 pages, but 16. Like what? Whatever. At least it's going out with a bang. More or less, anyway. Bang. Blowing my brains. Got him. Wow. Aren't you guys so lucky to have me? I tell the funniest jokes. Whatever. Hey, do you know what I'm drinking now? Okay, so your option is A, Sprite, B, Coke, C, Mountain Dew, and D, water. Yes. Answer. You're fucking wrong. It's high C or high punch. Whatever. Turf. Chop 'em, make a dance, make a motherfucker twerk. That's something that you don't normally get. Fuck. It's not even that long. It's like this small. Oh yeah, I need to stop recording. I need to do that basic necessity. God, why am I forgetting? Why am I like an old person? Got my shower. I'm all ready to go. Ooh. Sometimes I take my shower before doing this just to kind of like try out everything. You may have noticed that from like my wet hair. I try and do this at a relatively good time at night, and usually right after my showers kind of gets me energized for these things. Fuck me, like how do you mess up this badly? I think most of us agree that it being short isn't in of itself. Now really fuck me. Yeah. I think most of us that can't get a sentence out. I can never get a break. Whoa. I feel it in my brain. Shut up. Nobody cares. Goddamn YouTube ads. They're the worst. And lack of talent / effort in these quests. I'll repeat this just to make... that didn't make any fucking sense. Yeah, I was watching Netflix while doing this. Crime, I know. And that is oh oui. Hey, look, I found something. I picked it up just for you. Look at that. You make the pier. Oh yeah, the pier. Power to the piers. There are going to be open Freds. The Freds everywhere. Oh no, look out. They're taking over. Damn Freds. And his ridiculous traps. And his silly gang. It starts off Grafe. Grafe? The fuck is Grafe? Where did I get that word out of my vocabulary? Grafe. Hold on, is that a word? Grafe in American English, noun word forms plural German Griefen, a German, Australian, or Swedish title of a noble corresponding to ear or a count. What? Wait, hold on. Male or female is a historical title of a German normal, usually translated as count. Considering the imminent amount of noble ranks, the title is often treated as an equivalent to the British title of Ear, whose female version is Countess. Well, fucking look at that. Learn something new every day. Pucker up. Hey, fun fact. Did you know that I wore lipstick once? I may have the picture with me. I don't remember. But let me say, I look good with lipstick on. That's all I'm saying. Something you may not do if character choice in story is not satisfying. Excuse me. What the fuck? impression. Pretty good, right? Wow. Don't know what that was. A perfect time to talk about it because when... Who's messaging me on Discord? A birth of a new. As I'm writing this, Gotham Knight and the new Suicide Squad game trailers have been released at the DC fandom event. Might seem forever ago for you, but for me it's brand new, and part of me is excited that there's finally a new game in the Batman franchise, other than Batman Telltale, and it's a full AAA game, which is really exciting. I mean, who can't be happy with the Bat Family game? We've waited like 30 years for this shit. An RPG system that we've never seen before. Hell, a Suicide Squad game seemed almost like a long-awaited dream, and both of them have a consistent vision of a co-op game that you can play with friends. Then my instinct kick in, or the other persona of me takes control. The same that made these videos and asks a question. Why? Why be excited when this industry has let you down time and again? The RPG system is a terrible idea. The only combat is low effort at best. The RPG element also makes the game more tedious, and with a pretty shady track record, we also haven't seen any gameplay for the Suicide Squad, so what's the point of even having your faith in these games in the first place? It's hard to disagree with all that. While a multiplayer vision for the next set of DC games are cool, it could easily go to shit. And the quality can range from great to really bad. If some of you are wondering if I'll cover it or not, the answer is here. I'll make you a deal though. If it's really bad, like Batman Arkham Origins story / Batman Telltale bad, I'll cover it. Otherwise, my opinion of it and or the new games doesn't mean jack shit to me or to this series. No. Making decisions that are flat out bad to suddenly acting straight up right, I understand what they're trying to do, but when it's actually executed, it makes no sense. A good example of this is her working with terrorists only, even though in the next scene she helps you out. These things don't make much sense.